it's Lilia here with the Help Yourself podcast. And with me today, I have Madeline Black. Madeline's an author, a speaker. She's also got a TED Talk. And I know you were a psychotherapist as well before, Madeline. But
yeah, I mean, even though I don't practice, I guess I'm still always one.
Well, listen, thank you so much for giving me your time today. Really appreciate it. Great to chat to you because I know your story will help literally hundreds and thousands of women. So do you want to just start and tell us how you came to be an author and speaker?
Yeah, well, I was invited to share my story on an organisation's website called the Forgiveness Project, who are based in London. And Marina, the founder, she told me that I didn't need to put my name, I could be anonymous, but I was just tired of being ashamed for a crime that was committed against my body. And I just said, no, you can put my name and my photo. And it really went from there. My story kind of on her page went quite viral, and loads of people got in contact with me that I knew, because a lot of my friends, even though they maybe knew that I had been raped, they didn't know it was near fatal, or some people didn't know at all. So initially it was people I knew, and then I realized people were contacting me that I kind of knew and sharing their stories, and people I didn't know, this country, all overseas, America, India. And I understood then what Marina meant. She calls us story healers rather than storytellers. And just like her, I do believe in the power that comes when we share our stories. And it was actually meeting one of her other storytellers at an event in Glasgow, an amazing woman called Marion Partington, whose sister Lucy was murdered by Rose and Fred West. And when I saw her speak, I just saw the impact that she had on the audience. And she was amazing. And I read her book, and in it she wrote, I bought it that night, she wrote, "Now you must speak." And the idea came to me that I could share my story. I could maybe write my story down. Initially I was going to do it for me, but then I thought it could become a book. And the moment I had that thought, I just saw all the words. Every night I tried to get to sleep and they'd be buzzing around in my head over and over. And I would just sit down here at my Mac and the words just flowed out. So I literally kind of vomited my book. It took about 8 weeks, and that was published 2017. So April 2017, so about 3 years ago. And it's just gone on since then. Every time I speak somewhere, then I'm asked to speak somewhere else. And so I used to call myself an accidental speaker, but now I've become a speaker as well. So I speak out really to end the shame and the stigma and the silence surrounding sexual violence, but also to help other people find their courage and to find their voice so that they can live their life as well as they can. Because I believe if we don't speak about these things, or anything really, we hold anything back, then we really hold ourselves back when we don't speak and find our truth.
Absolutely. And I think it's the keeping of the secret and ruminating over in your own head that can cause so much damage, long-term damage to your emotional, mental and physical health. And there was a really interesting study that they found that when even people who had murdered or done really heinous crimes that could get them the death penalty, when they had them on the lie detector, the body just had this huge release when they told the truth, even if they knew that it was going to mean that they could die for it. It's almost like we need to speak our truth. Yes. And I think but it's about timing as well, isn't it? Very often, particularly with sexual abuse, you won't speak. Now tell me about yours, remind me about your story. How long did it take you to speak out?
Long time. So I was 13 and I had a night out with a friend, which obviously went disastrously wrong, and I was gang raped by two young men. And actually it was only in the writing of my book that I also realized I was raped 3 more times before I was 18, because I minimized it and put it down to bad sex. I became promiscuous, one of the many side effects that the impact had on me, and I just thought it was bad sex. But now I understand consent a lot better, and they were 3 more rapes. So I told my parents when I was 16, but it took me many, many years to speak publicly. I would say about 35 years, but it took me 3 years to find my voice. Not even find my voice, I had to write a note, I couldn't speak it.
Yes, yeah, I think that's quite common as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
It's
one of the threats, the last one, the worst one, I called him, he said to me the last thing he did was to tell me that if I spoke about it, he would find me, he would kill me, and he's holding the knife against my throat, which he already used on me. And yeah, I believed him. I thought he would find me and kill me. I thought this man was very capable. I'd looked into his eyes. So that threat stayed with me for a long time. It silenced me even more.
Absolutely. It's just, it's awful. But so it took you 3 years to tell your mum.
Yeah.
So you held that secret yourself for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then from when you're even 16, some people hold it a lot longer than that. And I think anybody listening to this, you always think, why didn't you tell somebody? Because it seems a really obvious thing to do. But when you start to work with people in the sexual abuse world, you realise that it's actually incredibly difficult to tell the story.
It's such an intimate crime, and I imploded. I took it all inside, and they were not supported by society. Even at 13 in the late 1970s, I had bought into rape-blaming messages. I thought, well, I'd met boys, I lied about where I was staying, I bought alcohol, and I thought I brought it on myself. It was my fault. And then we aren't supported. You hear then, well, what was she wearing? What was she drinking? And sadly, as we know, these messages are still around today. So yeah, it's a very intimate crime, and there's so much shame and guilt involved, and we're not supported by society. We're not encouraged to speak about the difficult things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some ways, I think it's easier not to speak, actually, and that's why I really wanted to speak to you about this, because I think it's a subject that I find really, we need to talk about, because,
Absolutely.
as somebody who deals with people who are physically ill, usually, often when you get round to it, there's been some kind of childhood abuse.
Yeah.
And so if we don't speak out, but then when you speak out, then everybody knows, and you feel that people are maybe looking at you thinking of you, the crime rather than you.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I assumed if people knew, they would look at me differently, they wouldn't want to speak to me anymore, they wouldn't want to know me, because I was left with feelings of I was disgusting, I was worthless, I was contaminated, and I thought they would see that in me as well. But that was my trauma and my shame speaking to me, but that took me many, many years to work that out. Now I don't care. Who knows, clearly.
Yes. And so tell me, what did you do, who helped you, and what helped you to come to terms, and then the forgiveness project? Because we know that ultimately it can be very, very difficult to forgive, but at some point along the healing journey, that becomes the key part to setting yourself free, doesn't it?
There was so much that helped me. It's hard to really pinpoint. I went for talking therapy. I made the decision I would never become a mum because I thought it was going to be like being raped again. But thankfully, I've had 3 gorgeous girls. I can say that because I'm their mum. And I reversed that decision. But there and then, something just came into me. And I thought, if I don't become a mum, I'm handing them all my power and control. And they actually wouldn't have any idea. So by reversing that decision, I called my plan my best revenge, and I was always determined to live my life, but I lived my life wearing a mask. People saw me and thought I was a perfect partner, wife, mum, homekeeper, but I really wasn't. Underneath, I was struggling. So I went for lots of talking therapy, but when my oldest daughter was 13, the same age that I was, all my memories returned. I was doing tons of personal development. I was studying psychotherapy, and Anna obviously was the same age. And actually, after a while, it wasn't my memories or the triggers that were causing my mind distress. It was my refusing to believe it. I was so caught in denial because, again, it was the shame. I thought, this can't be true. What this is, as if this was a reflection of me. So my therapist suggested it'd be really good to go for some body work, and I just didn't know anything about this. I went for therapeutic massage. I lay on the couch. I could hear this person screaming and shouting and fighting and crying. And I just thought, oh, for goodness sake, who is making all that noise? And then I realized it was me. It was all coming from me. And that then set me on this journey of doing loads of body work. So lots of alternative stuff. I've done, I don't know, about 50 sweat lodges. I've worked with a shaman for many years. I've taken plant medicine, San Pedro. I've had cranial sacral therapy, I've walked on fire, lots of things, always to challenge myself, because I realized that the therapeutic massage showed me that the trauma is in our body, it's in our cells. You know, when it comes back as a trigger, it doesn't come back as a memory, it comes back as a feeling. Yes. And therapeutic breath work, you name it, really, I've maybe tried it. I've done a lot. So for me, it was really important to integrate my body with my mind, because the night it happened, I was kicked out of my body and I never felt back in. You know, I really left the scene of the crime. And for years, I've just felt this empty shell. That was also a lot to do with avoidance and denial, but my journey was really coming back into me. So that really helped. But along with speaking obviously was the first thing that really helped. I've forgotten the other part of your question now because I'm rambling for so long.
No, it was just, you know, because I know that if there'll be people listening to this that have suffered from sexual abuse, and they'll be saying, well, what can I do to help myself? And your point there about the body, I know with the body holds a score. We know that. And particularly these really, you know, painful, traumatic moments that it gets held at a cellular level. And I think it's in that book, The Body Holds a Score, or it might have been another one, where they talk about the bottom up, top down. And so the top down is the talk treatments, but the bottom up are the you know, because you're having to start trusting again, trusting the body, trusting others. So very often people are too traumatized to even think about speaking about it. So the kind of fascia work where a lot of the emotions get trapped can help release, and just so that you can actually get enough energy to actually
it was so confirming for me, because I really struggled with my mind. But when I reacted like I did on the massage table, I thought, well, I can't make my body respond like that on purpose. There must be something in there. This must be coming from somewhere, because I really thought it was all rubbish. I thought I'd made it up. I didn't want to believe it at all. But having my body respond in such a really strong way was actually really helpful. It really was. I was shaking, crying, I was so distressed, but it was really good, because I went, this must be real. I couldn't. I was, you know, I'm shy Londoner. I wouldn't want to cause a scene and make a fuss.
Yes.
And so for me to do that, it really helped totally. That actually, there's something in there and it has to come out. I was always driven just to clean it up, I guess.
And I think, you know, that when apparently when 9/11 happened, they offered free counselling for, you know, people that had been horrendously traumatised by what they'd seen, and nobody came. But what they did do was they went for massage, they went to play football with their pals, they did things that they could, and probably subconsciously not even realising that they were actually processing the adrenaline and the cortisol and the fear by doing something with the body. And I think we kind of underestimate, you know, the power of dance, the power of shaking, the power of, you know, to really help the body get rid of the chemistry and the energy.
Absolutely, because I was back to being that 13-year-old girl. The energy of that trauma of that time is trapped and locked in your body. So when you're releasing it, you're literally asking yourself to go back to that event from a very different space, but it felt very real at the time. And some of the treatments I had, they didn't dialogue with me. They didn't need to know my history. You know, the therapeutic breath work with an amazing man, Alan Dolan, who's the breath guru. He's gone on to be hugely successful, and craniosacral therapy. She didn't need to know my details. You know, she just worked on my head and the shaking. There's a lot of shaking, the vibration. After a while, the dialogue came, but they didn't need to know what had happened. They could see that I was traumatized.
And I think that's sometimes you don't want to talk about it. And it takes, you know, I always say to my clients, you know, it takes such courage, personal development, because you have to look at every side of yourself. And, you know, it's, and also if it's something's been incredibly painful, it is obviously seems like common sense not to want to keep going back there. Why would you hurt yourself?
Yeah, it's weird one, isn't it? Because my instinct was to push it as far away as I can from my consciousness, but the very thing that helped me was to dive into it. Yes. You know, if you don't feel it, you can't heal from it. I really believe that. You have to really face it, accept it, feel it, acknowledge it, and then let it go. Which is not, I say that very flippantly, and it's not, you know, I didn't get to this place overnight. It's been a process, but it's really possible to get to this place.
Yes, and to be able to speak about it without the emotion and the pain that you experienced at the time of it. I think that's when you know that you're like, right, okay, because you're not that event, and that's the thing. It's a snapshot in our time, isn't it? But it takes over. I mean, I've seen it destroying people's lives. They just cannot let it go. They don't understand how to, and they don't understand.
Well, we also get conditioned then by the results of the trauma. So we get conditioned by being a victim or getting caught in that mode, and it's very hard to undo the patterns and behaviours that we've learned because of that trauma. And somehow we identify, whether it's positive or negative, we identify with that and think, if I take that away, who will I be? You know, it just becomes so normal as well. So it's really hard to break through, but it's really possible.
Yeah, too, and that's but the first step, I suppose, is just that awareness that it is possible. Because I think, again, in terms of timing, you know, if somebody was raped yesterday, that you know, that's not the time to have the discussion about this, you know, because it is about, you know, you have to go through a certain process of grief, etc., before you're ready to go, right, okay.
If someone said to me years ago, you'd end up forgiving them, I'm like, oh, shut up, there's no chance. I would never ever believe that in a million years. And again, it kind of took me by surprise, and it actually was nothing really to do with them, you know. It was always, I look at the word and I think it's for giving me a better chance, because before I did choose to forgive them, and it is a choice. I'm not saying you have to in order to heal, but this was, you know, how I chose to do it. I was angry, bitter, full of sarcasm, revenge. I plotted fantasies in my head about how I could find them, track them down, hunt them, you know, do horrible things to them. And I thought, I'm just as bad as them, all this revenge that I was plotting. But it really allowed me just to cut all the ties with the past. It allowed me just to accept and understand and just let it all go. Just really got to a much more peaceful place with it all.
And then you use that experience to then help others.
Yeah, but I don't want to be a forgiveness preacher. That's not really what I'm about. It's really just to help other people find their voice so they can start their healing journey as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, given your own personal experience, like, can you remember when you told your mum that was a key point for you, just finding that one person? It might be your mum, it might not be, it might be somebody else too.
It was a key point, but not in a good way, unfortunately, because when they called the other girl who was involved, she said it didn't happen like I said. So she had a different story to me. She said they were nice boys, they were both sons of diplomats. My dad still wanted to go to police, but my mum was really, really quiet. But then I thought my friend has betrayed me. My mum didn't believe me. So that made me very hostile towards her. Yeah. So for a long time, I didn't understand my mum's silence. Many, many years later, my parents were married for 38 years. They had 5 kids together. My dad had now passed. She told me that as an 8-year-old, she had been raped as well by a neighbour. Every time my granny would send her to play with her friend, this man would abuse my mum. He was sentenced, she told her brother. He was also abusing his daughters. But when he was in prison, my mum's family, they packed up and they moved away and they never spoke about it again. So now when I heard that, I realized she couldn't say anything because it was all her unprocessed trauma. It just silenced her, and she had all these flashbacks of going to the police and having examinations internally as an 8-year-old, and she thought incorrectly 3 years later I would be put through that. And she said, no, she can't go to the police. But that was all she said.
Yes, and I mean, the pain for her must have been horrendous.
So painful. And she's amazing because, you know, she'd never had counselling or any therapy. She's now 80. My dad didn't know, you know, 5 kids together, all those years married. But now, since I've started to share my story, she's told my stepdad, and at an event I was doing in Glasgow, a local one, she came along. And I said, you know, sometimes I share your story. She allowed me to write her story in my book. And she said, what were you saying? I said, it's okay, I won't mention it, it's fine. And afterwards, she told one of my friends that it had happened to her as well. And I was like, oh my gosh. She's gone from never telling my dad of all these years to telling a random friend of mine. So it was like, wow. And that's the power of sharing our stories. That's what happens. We give each other permission to speak as well.
It's quite scary, though, how many women it's happened to.
So many.
It really is.
I don't know many women that haven't had something, even if it's not sexual assault or rape, some inappropriate behaviour, language, made to feel uncomfortable, fearful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's out there. It really is.
And I think even in terms of the education, you know, I've got 2 young grandsons and a granddaughter. You're very aware, you know, of educating them and helping them to understand, you know, because I think a lot of guys have no idea the lasting damage that can be done by mindless, unconscious behaviour.
Yeah,
That's it. It's very
that's got a good role model in you then. It's good.
Yeah. So can you tell me though, I know you don't want to bang on about forgiveness, but from my perspective, I think it's a really key part for living a joyful, happy life, because if you don't, there's always that little bit of like, you know, can we really just go, let the universe take care of it? These people betrayed me, they behaved awfully, they didn't get, because that's the other thing I think, you know, with going to the police, etc., that sets off a whole load of other potential
and
drama
I also
and trauma
didn't
as well.
need justice to be able to choose forgiveness. People think, but they never were charged, they never went to prison. It was a decision I could make inside my heart for me. So it was really when I went back to therapy when Anna was 13, and at the end of the 3 years, Ron, my therapist, turned to me and said one day, you know, maybe they weren't born rapists. And I was just so angry with him. I couldn't believe it. But he then sent me on this path, whether that was conscious or not, of inquiry and wanting to understand. Because I don't believe that people are born rapists. I do believe that we come in equal. We're all a blank sheet, a blank slate, and we do get corrupted, conditioned by our life experiences. And it made me really think about, well, what have they seen or heard or experienced? And my friend Anne, which I mentioned in my TEDx, she was a midwife, and she told me something, and I never ever forgot it. She was my manager where I worked for a long time. She told me that she had delivered thousands of babies and she never once met an evil one. And that always stayed with me, you know. I just thought, I've done a really good job of living my life as best as I can, and it's not been easy, but I've really cleaned up the trauma well. But I thought they have to live with what they did to another human being, and I can't imagine that's easy. I can't imagine that's easy. And that's when I felt compassion in my heart. I could relate to the humanity in them. I'm not saying I forgive the act of rape, because I never would. It was a total violation on my body, my mind, and my psyche, which impacted on me for years. But I could forgive them for being human. And you know, I
think
saw
to
that
be able to put yourself into their shoes, or perhaps their parents' shoes, you know, because whether it's one person raping and one person being raped or more, when the story comes out, there's a lot of hurt that goes around in the family and in the inner circle, and you know, there's a lot of trauma.
I do believe hurt people hurt people. Yes,
well, and I think if that can make it easier for you to see them as a human being rather than as, you know, a rapist, a born rapist.
And you know, they are someone's sons, they are our friends, they are our neighbours. They're not a monster that we like to think they are, that jumps out the bushes. They were sons of diplomats, you know, they were so-called nice boys, and nice boys rape as well, you know. It's not just this image that we have of a hooded man jumping out the bushes. But, you know, I saw when they were dehumanizing me, they were just dehumanizing themselves, that they weren't connected into their goodness, their source, their light, whatever you want to call it. And over time, it took me a long, long time, I realized that I'm not my body, like you said at the start. I'm not the things that were done to me. I'm not the events in my life. And I do believe that the true essence of what we are all born with, it could never be touched by what they did to me. Never.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the Forgiveness Project, how that works.
Sure, it was started by Marina Cantacuzino, who's a journalist. I think it's been going about 15 years now, something like that. And originally she collected stories of forgiveness. She was interested in them. She wants to really create an alternative to hate. You know, there doesn't have to be hate, to bring more peace into the world. And she believes the stories of forgiveness can do that. When you see some of the stories on there, it's remarkable. So there's a woman called Jo Berry. Her father was killed in the Brighton bomb many years ago, Anthony Berry. And she now speaks with Patrick McGee, who was the bomber who planted the bomb.
Wow.
So that's just one of the most incredible stories. They say that they're having a conversation about forgiveness, around peace. There's a woman whose son was murdered, and she now lives next door to the man who murdered her son. You know, so it's like, you think, well, if they can choose to do that and it makes life a lot less complicated, a lot easier. You know, we all have that choice that's within all of us to choose. So as well as having all the stories on their website, they also do restorative justice programs, and they run a program called Restore, which I was just starting to get involved with, when we go into prisons and we use our stories to really, it's like a personal development group. And I would say, I've done it twice now in Peterborough Prison, 90% of the women, once I spoke, told me that they had been raped or they had been abused. There was so much trauma in the prison systems. It was just shocking, you know. I was just
criminalizing them instead of understanding what's happened.
It just broke my heart listening to their stories, horrific stories. And then the Forgiveness Project also has an exhibition which they share maybe 30 or so of the stories, and it's a traveling exhibition, so it goes from schools to different centers. There's a traveling exhibition in America. I don't know, obviously at the moment, if that's really traveling around. But yeah, they really, it's about just creating a more peaceful way rather than looking for an alternative to hate. So it's an amazing organization to be part of. It's fantastic.
Sounds amazing. And I think, you know, the prison work is just, it's key. To me, we have to be looking at the addiction, the communities, the homeless communities in the prison system, and are we criminalising something that really is about childhood abuse? Because it very often is. And, you know, if we truly want to rehabilitate and live in peace, we have to look after each other, no matter how heinous the crime has been. It's like, well, how can we understand, perhaps in some level, same with paedophilia, you're like, well, can we understand what these people have gone through? Why, you know, we need to get it out from under the carpet to have some kind of solution. It's a
lot easier for people to hate, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it seems to be. And, you know, like I was saying about the timing, about the idea of forgiveness, where, you know, there's a time when you're ready to hear, you know, can you look at that pain? And, you know, I remember an old client of mine, and her son was put to jail for sex crimes, let's just say. And I was researching it at the time, and they were talking about places, this place in America, where they had the perpetrator meet the victim and go through and talk. And they, you know, it was hugely successful. But again, it depends what somebody's done to you. You're maybe not prepared.
And it's also a process, you know, it doesn't just happen overnight, these meetings. There's maybe like a year of meetings, and there's training both sides of what to expect. So just before I shared my story, I had made some contact with another story online. It was a woman who'd also been raped. It was a serial rapist who broke into her home, and the only reason he stopped because her knife broke, so she's convinced he would have carried on. Her 2-year-old was sleeping in the house. He was actually, had been out of prison for a week. He was released on bail or something, and she was going to meet this man in prison because he threatened to kill her when he came out. And it was about a year of meetings. She went to meet him, and that's when I thought, gosh, if she can sit opposite this man and have a meeting, I can share my face and my name. And I just thought she was a warrior. I thought she was quite extraordinary.
I think that's the power of you sharing your story, is that there'll be somebody that'll go, right, okay, you know, I can now have the courage. Because, you know, most of us, we need to be inspired by somebody else.
Because it was somebody else speaking that helped me find my voice. You know, I didn't always have my voice, and now I just intend to play that forward.
I know, it's fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for giving me the time and sharing your story. It is super fantastic. And I know that if people want to contact you to speak, you can send me your links, and we'll put them in the podcast and on the YouTube channel. So thanks so much for that.
You're very welcome.
And I will hopefully catch up with you really soon.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.